Very glad to be here at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of New Bern. Early in my theological career, I noticed that what people believed seemed less important than how they believed. Because I met kind Christians and kind atheists. I met mean Christians and mean atheists. It seems that any belief can be twisted to fit someone's personality. Spirituality seems to be tied to something deeper than beliefs or dogmas. And then I was trying to search for a definition of spirituality that could be acceptable to the many different beliefs that are in a Unitarian Universalist congregation. As I studied psychology and social work, I became familiar with the Myers Briggs Personality test. And as Joanne explained earlier, we're generally aligned along four continuums: extroversion versus introversion, intuition versus sensing, perception versus judging, and thinking versus feeling. Now, people debate the scientific merit of this analysis because it's a totally subjective test based on what people say they think they are and how self-aware are any of us of who we really are. But I found this Myers Briggs tool to be a good starting point for people to understand how they see themselves and how others might see them. The test, to take it properly, needs someone who is trained in interpretation, and there's a lot of nuances to it. And it can be very complex. When I was thinking of spirituality, I said, gosh, I want something that's a little simpler so people can move on from the test and get into the conversation about how they look at the world. I was hoping for simplicity. And I found it in one of the strangest places. I was at a street fair, and I went by the table of the Libertarian Party. And they had a little tiny card, and they called it the world's smallest political quiz. And it was just 10 questions. And there was 5 questions about how much you think government should interfere in your personal freedom, and 5 questions about how much you think government should interfere or regulate your economic life. And from these 10 questions, they came up with 4 types of people. They said they define liberals as those who want to regulate commerce, but not persons. People are free to marry who they want to, believe what they want, but companies should be regulated so they pay decent wages and don't pollute or discriminate. On the other hand, conservatives were defined as people who regulate personal freedoms, but not economic freedoms. People who regulate sexuality, what is the proper belief in the United States, but then they insist on free markets and non-regulations for businesses. The third category was authoritarians, who regulate both your personal freedom and your economics. This would be a totalitarian or fascist state. And libertarians are those who wish to regulate neither. Again, a short test, the validity could be questioned, but it gives a starting point to talk about how we align politically. So when I was thinking, What two dimensions am I going to define spirituality as? And I began with the Hebrew scriptures. We hear these words, God and Lord, but beneath those English words are Hebrew words that don't literally translate into God or Lord. The Hebrew word Elohim is a plural of the word strengths, or power, or energy. And the word Yahweh, which is usually translated Lord or Jehovah, means I am that I am. It's not even a noun, it's a verb of being. It might be better translated as existence. So then I asked two questions. Where is power located? What is the locus of control? And where is existence located? What is the locus of reality? For this location, I used a Myers Briggs typology. Introverts look inside themselves, and extroverts look outside of themselves. Those who believe that the power is located within are empowered. They act upon the world. Those who believe that the locus of control is beyond themselves are receptive. They submit to the powers that be. Those who believe that the locus of reality is within are subjective. They imagine their own reality and distrust the perceptions of the outside world. Those who believe the locus of reality is beyond them are objective. They try to be objective about the outside world and minimize their own feelings and opinions about it. Of course, like all typologies, very few people are pure types. And your type may change based on your circumstances or thoughts, or in some roles you may be one thing, and in other roles you might be another thing. Think of some of us are parent, spouse, and child. Those different roles cause for different ways of being. But perhaps there's something that is consistent across all those roles: the spirituality. Now, some of you took this quiz on my Facebook page, and some of it was on in the UU update, which you got in your email. But let's go through it now. Tom Shoup is going to put up the first slide. Thank Tom. This is his first time running the meeting, and I gave him something nobody's done before. So, very good, Tom. You made it. So, I start with locus of control. And I tell people to pick a statement that most closely matches your belief. I look at these statements myself and I think, well, I actually believe both. But this is something that's done in surveys. It's known as forced choice. It makes you think about what you really feel or what you feel the most. So the first question, you decide whether you A, question authority, or B, follow the rules. The second question is, do we make our own destiny? Is A, and B, is our lives are shaped by things beyond our control. Emerson has a popular quote that's attributed to him. It's not what happens to you, it's how you respond. 3, I act on my opinions. Or B, I check with others before acting. How much do you check things out with opinions and experts before you make a decision? 4, part A is wealth comes from hard work. B is wealth is controlled by the wealthy. And the 5th question is thinking about art. And there are many artists in this congregation, and so I want to think of how your spirituality relates to your art. And in the terms of locus of control, A is an artist should inspire people to change. Or B, an artist really has no control of how people respond to their work. You may have poured your soul into it, and they pick it because it matches their drapes. So when you're going through this test, count the number of A answers. And if you have 3, 4, or 5 A's, I label you empowered. You rely on yourself more than others. If you scored 1, 2, 0, 1, or 2, then I have labeled you receptive, that you rely on the community to guide you. I now ask Tom to please put up the second slide about locus of reality. Is existence or reality inside of you or beyond you? The first question is an old philosophical question. Do you believe A, if a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, it still makes a sound? Or B, sound is a perception. If no one hears it, it doesn't exist. Now, like some people will answer this question, says, well, the tree falls and there's a vibration, and that's a physical fact. But we have subsonic vibrations that we can't hear, and there's hypersonic vibrations that we can't hear. Dogs can hear those hypersonic vibrations, and whales can hear those subsonic vibrations. So those are sounds. But there are vibrations that are beyond what a dog can hear and what a whale can hear. If no one's hearing them, are those vibrations sound? 2, A is I believe only what is scientifically probable. And B is I believe many things that science can't understand. And 3, A is emotions lead to poor decisions. Or B, I trust my emotions in order to be true to myself. 4A is truth depends on facts located outside of myself. Or B, truth depends on how I interpret those facts. And 5, again, is an artistic question. A, artists should paint what they see. In other words, what is realistic, the objective portrait. Or B, artists should paint whatever they like. So think of your answers and count the number of B answers you have. And if you have 3, 4, or 5 B answers, I label you subjective. That for the most part you believe that the truth is within. If you have 0, 1, or 2 answers, I label you objective. The truth is out there. So what do we do with these labels? Well, let's move to the next slide, Tom, and we'll indicate. If you found that you are receptive plus subjective, I've labeled you a mystic. The external locus of control plus an internal locus of reality produces the patient dreamer. Has other people accused you of being a patient dreamer? Well, it really doesn't matter what they think, because you have. But if that's so, do you think of yourself that way? The second group is receptive plus objective equals the sage. It means they have an external locus of control and an external locus of reality. This type produces the true believer. There's a belief outside themselves, they hear it, they accept it, and they follow it. The third one is empowered plus subjective, and that is avatar. And this is why I got 3 on empowered and 4 on subjective. Because even I couldn't buy that the tree doesn't make a sound. As much as I tried to defend that earlier in the quiz. An internal locus of control and an internal locus of reality produces the visionary leader, the person, the preacher, the person who, the politician, the theorist. And the last type is sort of you found yourself empowered and objective. That is the activist. There's an internal locus of control that I can really change things. But the things that you're changing is that external locus of reality. I'm going to change what's out there. And this produces the dutiful disciple. I'll explain what these mean a little bit more. Tom, why don't you take down the last slide? Thank you so much, everybody. Cheer Tom for how well he did on the slides. This is a group effort. If you want to lower your sense of a locus of control, be part of a Zoom meeting, because so many things can go wrong. Well, this idea of spiritual style, and those of you who have an internal locus of control probably hated it when I used the word labeled. Because who are you, me, who am I to label you? But this is something I do to get a sense of who people are. And I hold these labels very loosely. Because very few people are a few type. Not many people on this test will score a 5 or a 0. But let me describe these pure types and then listen. See which ways that you are similar or different. The mystic. This person lives in a subjective world. Meditation is reflective silence, focusing on breathing, letting the mind flow where it will, until it rests in the essence of pure being. if a mystic perceives God, it's through the voices and visions in their head. But an atheistic mystic still has an intuitive understanding that the atomic particles inside themselves are the same as those in the most distant star. Success is defined as peace of mind. Mystics do not try to impress others, and they're not too impressed by the vanity of this world. As artists, they are abstract, like Jackson Pollock, spreading paint over the canvas, perhaps dancing as he spreads the paint around with motions. There's no literal interpretation of a Jackson Pollock painting. It's an expression of his inner being. Mystics prefer New Age music, focusing on tonal qualities and vibrations, using non-traditional scales and rhythms, and a lot of repetition to create a trance-like experience. Sages approach problems with patience and perseverance, like a tree standing by the mystics. Mystics approach their problems with patience and perseverance. Like a tree standing by the river, they shall not be moved. They wait for things to settle down. Well, this can backfire during times when action is needed. They may wallow in indecision or despair when they really need to move and do something. The avatar. The avatar is the creative leader, the theorist, the visionary. The term avatar comes from Hinduism, where God comes down and becomes incarnate in various forms, like Krishna. It's an incarnation. These people hold the God energy inside of them, and they project their subjective reality into the world. Jesus was an avatar. Mark 1:22 reports, he was teaching them as one having authority and not as the scribes. The scribes were sages. I'll get to that later. And Einstein, though he was a scientist, and we might expect him to be more objective, he trusted his subjective style. In a 1929 interview, he said, I believe in intuitions and inspirations. I sometimes feel that I am right. I do not know that I am. When 2 expeditions of scientists financed by the Royal Academy went forth to test my theory of relativity, I was convinced that their conclusions would tally to my hypothesis. I was not surprised when the eclipse of May 29, 1919 confirmed my intuitions. In Unitarian Universalism, Ralph Waldo Emerson was an avatar. He wrote in his journal, the purpose of life seems to equate a man or a human with himself. He is not to live the future as described to him, but to live the real future to the real present. That living as if the future is already here. As artists, avatars have a purpose. They produce propaganda and advertisements. They paint posters like Rosie the Riveter or the iconic red, white, and blue Obama Hope poster. In 1872, there was a painting called American Progress by John Gast. And it depicts a giant white-robed goddess leading settlers westward to fulfill their manifest destiny. Avatars also create symbols like the American flag or the Nike swoosh or the Eiffel Tower, which was built by Eiffel as an advertisement for a structural steel company, but it became a symbol of Paris and their technological prowess. As musicians, avatars are jazz players. They improvise and they stray from the sheet music, trying to blaze a new path. Avatars have supreme self-confidence. This attracts many followers. But the belief that their thoughts are the best thoughts, or that their words are the best words, can lead themselves and others astray. Hitler was an avatar. His autobiography, Mein Kampf, which translates into My Struggle, his personal struggle, was also a manifesto for the Nazi Party organization. So, the good news, if you came out as an avatar, you have some great ideas and some powerful leadership skills. The bad news is you better be humble and learn to respect others. You may be delusional. That's the type I am. The next type is the sage. The sage accepts and tries to preserve a truth that they have received. As noted early, the scribes and the Pharisees described in the Bible were sages. They were lawyers and judges. They figured out what the law actually means, and they dispensed that law to other people. And secular lawyers and judges are the same way. Justice Antonio Scalia claimed to be a strict constructionist, resisting new interpretations of the U.S. Constitution, harking back to the original intent of the Founding Fathers. Now, another sage is Bill Nye the Science Guy. He has a BS in mechanical engineering from Cornell. Now, engineering is applied science. You follow the rules of science to solve problems. But Bill Nye is most famous for being a teacher, one who dispenses this knowledge, as a defender of the scientific method. He's a true believer in science. If you are a sage and a musician, you follow the sheet music. And you prefer realistic art of acceptable subjects, like landscapes. Sages were the people who hired Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel so that there would be a lesson for those who couldn't read. And Michelangelo, who was a creative force, perhaps an avatar, kept on having fights with him about what this art should look like, because he had his own vision. There was a lot of conflict between the sages and the avatar. The strength of the sage is relying on the tried and the true. The danger of being a sage is that one is dependent on the thoughts of others. If you are a true believer in an avatar who is an awful person, that person can lead you down the garden path, and they may be even abusive to you. The activist is the final form I discuss today. Whereas avatars create and share new understanding, and sages believe and teach it, and mystics have a deeper understanding that transcends all understanding. Activists are the people who will actually get things done in this world. They test the theories of Einstein. They follow the teachings of Jesus, feeding the poor, healing the sick, welcoming the stranger. They are the soldiers fighting for the nation's ideals. They are the protesters on the street. And they are the police trying to control the protesters. Each are working towards a vision of justice that they believe in and have learned. Activists are the political organizers making phone calls and sending postcards. They are the many essential workers who work in this pandemic because it's my duty to put food on the table for my family, or I have medical training and I have to step into the breach. If they believe in God, they find God by interacting with the community, following the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law, following the law of love rather than the dictates of dogma. As secular scientists, they test the hypothesis and publish things. Their understanding of truth evolves as new evidence appears. As artists, they are trying to capture something real, like the precise bird drawings of Audubon, which are so hyper-analytical. They have a good picture of what the bird might look like and its features, but they seem so totally devoid of life and the invigorating spirit of something that's actually alive. As musicians, activists are composers. They take the notes and the rhythms and combine and recombine them like a chemist in a lab or a cook in a kitchen, seeing if they can make something new out of the old, what they've been given. The strength of activists is that they have clear goals. They measure their success by tangible things. Is their song a hit? Did they win the election? Were the hungry fed? Did the pledge drive cover the budget? The danger for activists is that they may not be self-reflective. All that action can lead to exhaustion and burnout. And repressed emotions may come out sideways as depression or hostility. They may start to doubt the intrinsic worth of what they're doing. Take an anti-war protester. Keeps fighting and fighting and fighting, struggling against war. And wars continue to happen. That's discouraging. But the Quaker, a mystic tradition, is able to do it because they see the intrinsic worth as mystics of what they're doing. And that gives them the strength and the emotional fortitude and the spirit to go on. So what have we learned today? We're talking about the style of your spirituality, not the content, not what you believe or disbelieve. Because there are Muslims who are mystics, sages, avatars, and activists. A mystic atheist may commune with nature and feel no need to analyze it. Activist Buddhists set themselves on fire in the street to protest the Vietnam War. I think many UUs are avatars. They refused to accept the teachings of the sages. They thought for themselves and left the religion of their youth. But other UUs are sages. When you go to a place like General Assembly, there are the people who are just there and they really have a deep belief in the history of Unitarian Universalism. Our congregation in Outlaws Bridge, about 35 miles south of here, preserves their Universalist heritage. And in this congregation, the meditation group that's been so successful, it has almost as many people come to it as a worship service before we had to leave our building because of COVID. Shows that many of us are mystics. And every UU congregation has its activists who do not worry about the past or all that spiritual mumbo jumbo. They're too busy changing the future. Our congregation contains all types and combinations. By listening to each other with understanding, not arguing for your view, but listening for their view, we may discover that we indeed have all types within ourselves. We may have our preferences. I became a preacher because I'm an avatar and I like to share my opinions because I think they make a difference. Whether they do or not, who knows? But there's times in my life where I need to stop and listen to the people other than myself to realize that there is a lot that's beyond my control. And I think many of us are feeling that in this time of pandemic. So there's times where, especially if I've told the whole congregation to go out and protest something, I better show up and be an activist at least that day, even though it's not my natural tendency. I show up because I told people to show up, but it looks bad. I'm not really an activist. I'm an avatar. And there's times when I just have to sit back and say, what are the facts? What is actually going on? What is the things that I can do? What are ways that I teach? That I share some knowledge I knew. I knew some Hebrew, so I shared that as part of the service, because that helps people who need to know that there's these crazy thoughts of mine actually come from someplace. And so I have to realize that too, that I'm not the most original thinker in the world, but there's things that I am connected to that are part of me. And I hope that that's what all of you get out of this service. And I hope that many of you come to the talk afterwards. They have gotten the Zoom link for that. And I think this is something we can talk about in our small groups too. Of what is the thing that gives our life meaning? And how are we in the world? Not so much to tell others what our opinions are, but to listen and to understand each other and make deeper connections. May we bless and be blessed. With Judy Harrison on the piano and Beth Ann leading the song, please join in singing When Our Heart is in a Holy Place.